day, everyone. So if you are a visual artist who has been wondering how to feature their visual art through a DJ set, or the other way around, maybe you are a DJ who has been wondering how to expand their DJ set into the visual realm, and maybe has been getting curious about very complex tools like Touch Designer, for example, well, then I think you might find this video interesting. And one fun fact is that today is my birthday, and I thought what could make my birthday special? And turns out, I think my heart tells me it's a video about how the nodes and the rack view work together in Vizloom. See, nodes are an amazing kind of user interface when it comes to building multimedia artwork. And this is because they marry the flexibility that you would have in, say, a coding language with the immediacy and ease of use of a normal user interface. For example, if you have some parameters that influence your visual, there is probably some slider that you can just drag around and preview the results in real time. Similarly, if you have some images as inputs, you can at a glance see what these images are and where they're going in your creation. And these are all things that really wouldn't jump out to you if you were to stare at a wall of code. At the same time, however, nodes can get very messy very quickly to work with. In fact, I find it funny that there is this term in software development called spaghetti code, which is to indicate some code that is just very intricate and difficult to understand. And I've never seen anything that gets closer to the metaphor as nodes when what you're trying to build with nodes is particularly complicated. Because you have to always drag things around, and you need to make sure that they're not overlapping, and you need to click on these little sockets to connect them. So they're good until you need to do something quickly. Like, for example, you need to create different visuals for each of the 15 or 30 songs that you have in your playlist for a DJ gig coming up, for example. I don't think you would want to dive into nodes to get that done. At least I wouldn't want to do that. And this is why Vizloom gives you the rack view, which is more similar to the same user interface that you would find in a video editor or a music production software. In fact, it kind of feels like a crossover between the two. It's meant to surface all the relevant controls in one page, while still allowing you a significant amount of flexibility. And then if you do have some specific needs and some extra time, you can dive into the node editors and really build anything that you necessitate. Now, if you want to get a better idea of how you would usually use Vizloom, which is through templates that are already pre-built, then make sure to check out the walkthrough video that I will link in the description. Today, instead, we're going to dive a little deeper into how you can build a template from scratch and how the nodes and the rack view work together. Okay, I think I have been teasing this long enough, so let's get to it. We begin, as always, by adding a song to our project, and then we'll jump directly into the create phase to find it mostly empty. It's not actually completely empty. As you can see here, we do have some options for types of tracks that we might be able to add, and that's because there are some nodes in the editors here already. Not enough to actually properly visualize a song, but this is a default starting point that can allow you to familiarize with the basic concepts. And in fact, today we'll basically focus on rebuilding something similar to this from scratch. Normally, what you would want to use is a more full-featured template like this one. Lots of stuff. But for today, I prepared this actually empty template that we can use to start from, actually scratch. As you can see here, there is no option now to add any track. Let's begin by giving us some types of animation tracks. And we can do that by going to the animations editor. There is a couple of types of nodes that we can use to create a type of track. And these are the input nodes and the output nodes. In fact, as you can see, they both have a track type widget at the top, and it does the same in both cases. It allows you to select an existing track type or create a new one, which we will do now, and we will start by creating a percussion type animation track. You can select some attributes that will characterize the track throughout the editor, like a color, and input and output nodes will share these attributes once you point them to the same type of track. What this gets us so far is an option in the Add Track menu for a percussion kind of track. But as you can see, it doesn't do basically anything yet. And so let's start adding some capabilities to it. Let's head back to the animations. We'll set this aside for now. We'll start focusing on the output node and something to feed to it, which can be, since it's a percussion track, it's going to be a percussion looking kind of animation. So let's add a metronome node, which comes pre-configured with the song's BPM. We can pick a subdivision. 1/4 means it will produce 1 pulse per beat, and as you can see, it's already doing that. And in fact, this pulses with the beat. Now, the way a percussion looks, at least in my mind, it does have a little bit of a decay instead of looking just like a instantaneous pulse like this. So let's give it just that. Let's give it a decay and pass the metronome through that. And then we can feed the decay into the animation track output. And as you can see, these pulses become a little bit gentler on the eye. So to add some audio reactivity, we can use a song info node, which comes with a waveform of the song. And we can multiply the pulses by using a math node in between. And as you can see, while these pulses just looked like a big block of green, once they get multiplied by the waveform, they look a lot more relevant to the song that we are actually trying to visualize. And this is what we can feed into the decay, which will now both add a decay and follow some of the transitions in the song.
How silent.
This will give us in the rack view a decent animation graph, but we still have no way to customize it from here. And this is where the input node comes into play. So we can edit inputs here, and then we can add a number. And we can connect the number, for example, to the decay, specifically the duration parameter of the decay. And we can also easily copy all the settings of that duration parameter instead of setting them manually here by clicking this button here, which will correctly constrain them to be no less than 0 because it doesn't make to have a negative duration for a decay. However, we do want to rename this to decay. Now, if we go to the rack view, we finally have a control and a way to customize this animation. And very importantly, we can create however many tracks we want of this type now, each with its own parameters and each with its own names, long decay, short decay, for example. An animation track on its own is not very useful if we cannot attach some visuals to it. And so it's time to jump into the visualization tab and create ourselves some visual kind of track. Here, the workflow is very similar. You add an input node and an output node, and we create a new type of track called visual, because I have that much imagination. And we give it a nice electric blue color. Point the output node to the same. And what's particularly fun of the visualization editor is that you get some extra types of inputs here. Most importantly, you get a visual reference type of input, which allows you to pick a visual from your gallery, as well as a animation type of input, which is similar to the number that we saw earlier with the slider. However, this one allows you to also select an animation as an input for whichever parameter that you decide to drive with it. And we are going to use these two widgets to select a visual and control its opacity. So to control its opacity, we add a merge visuals node, which has this nice opacity dial here, and we can plug in the visual here, plug in this widget here, and plug the output into the output node. And if we want to preview our work while we are in the nodes editor, we can select some default values. These are values that will be assigned to any track that we create as a starting point. So let's pick some trees here. And very importantly, see, we still don't get anything here. That's because the previews are based on the tracks that we have in the rack view. So if there is no track of this type in the rack view yet, we will see no preview. And that's why we had this button here that creates that track for us and gives us the preview. So what we see now here is going to be the output of this track. If you have multiple, it will just pick the one at the bottom. And as you can see here, now we can control the opacity. And so we should probably call this opacity as well. And save. Don't forget to save. Now I'd also like to make this type of track a little bit more interesting. And so perhaps let's edit the capability of changing the color hue of the visual as well. And there is really no limits to what you can do here. You can combine all sorts of nodes in all sorts of ways to create custom visual effects. In this case, we're going to go for a very simple color adjustment node, which also accepts an input for its hue parameter. And we're going to copy the settings over. And as you can see, now we have this extra capability here. Before we jump back into the rack view, I'm going to set these inputs to some sensible defaults. I don't like to have a pre-selected visual, for example. And we can then jump in the rack view and start using our visual node however we like. Let's add a lighting source in this case, which can be pulsing to the percussion that we created earlier. And to make the visual a little bit more relaxing, perhaps let's add a foundation of that daytime visual that we saw earlier. So let's create a new track. And let's select that nice visual we had. And also let's make sure that the blending mode up here is set to additive for this kind of work, because otherwise, whenever the opacity is at its maximum, the visual below it will be completely hidden. While if you set it to additive, they will just blend together nicely.
Let us dream of evanescence
Like
and
this.
linger in the beautiful foolishness of things.
Cool. Don't forget to play around with the hue to make it a little more fun. We added it for a reason after all. There you go. Look at that green grass going. Okay, now an interesting capability of these tracks is that they can actually interact with each other, and this is what turns out to be a huge time saver in visualizing your songs. For example, in all the templates so far, I've always added a song structure track that influences the amplitude of all percussions, so that when you have an atmospheric intro or a breakdown in a song, I tune away the visuals tied to a percussion to give it a more relaxed kind of pace. How is that kind of thing built? I'll show you real quick. So we're gonna go back into the animations tab, and we're going to create a new input node and an output node. We're going to point these to a new type of track called song structure. We'll make it purple. And a song structure, most importantly, will need a way to set keyframes so that I can go and click on the waveform to tell it where the atmospheric intros and breakdowns are. So let's add a keyframes input. Keyframes really are just a list of numbers where each number represents a time in the song. And we have a node that can turn these numbers into pulses, which is called pulses. What are pulses? They are the same thing that the metronome node here was producing earlier. They're just many little sticks. And in this case, it will just be very few sticks wherever I decided to click on the waveform. So for example, let's tell it that we have an atmospheric intro up to here, and we have a breakdown, it looks right here. And as you can see, this produces this list of numbers, and it creates through this node a set of pulses. If I go and look what's around here, there is, would you look at that, one little pulse. There you go. Now what do we do with these little sticks? We can pass them through a pulses switch. This is really like a light switch. When you click it, it turns on. You click it again, it turns off. So anytime it receives a pulse, it will change its state from on to off. And that's what creates this nice square wave that represents the structure of our song. When it's up, we are dancing, there is the rhythm. When it's down, we are not. And we are just basking in the beauty of the melodies and arpeggios, so to speak. So let's plug this into the animation track output so that we'll be able to preview it from the rack view, but we'll also multiply it by the metronome using the same trick we used earlier, a math node. I hope you like math, because you use a lot of these nodes in here. Which is then what we feed into the rest of the pipeline we already had before. And now, as you can see, the percussion is gated by the song structure. However, it does not abruptly cut down the decay of the percussion, because that decay is applied later. This is very important to consider when you're doing motion design using techniques like this one that are more signal processing inspired. And as you can see, when the breakdown comes, the percussion gently disappears as opposed to just abruptly disappearing. Cool, so as usual, let's give it some sensible defaults. In this case, I just like to leave it empty. And when we go over to the rack view, we'll see that now everything is shut off because everything is getting multiplied by that song structure. So we're going to add a new one, and I like to have it as the first thing you see in the template, and then we're going to mark out our breakdowns and introductions. And as you can see, as I mark those out, all of the animation tracks update accordingly. Now, one thing you might be wondering is, what if I have multiple song structure tracks? In the nodes, we are only saying that any song structure track will influence any percussion track in this way. And that is a fair question. And the answer is the last one wins, basically. So if I create a new one right under this one, see, this one is all set to 0, everything else gets thrown into 0. If I give it a different range, see, this one is the one that's influencing all the tracks below. This does not mean that you can only have one per template. It just means that the order matters. In fact, if I take this long decay here and I move it up, now this one follows the first one. So you read it like a text, where each track influences the other one in the order in which they appear. Sorry, I really had to take that one. But there is also not much else that I wanted to cover today. Let's just clean up this template and perhaps show you one last thing, which is that you don't need to have a track out there for every animation that you use. You can create animations right within the visualization tracks. So for example, by selecting a percussion from the create new section of this menu, and you can dive one level deeper to customize that specific animation however you like. This will follow the song structure just the way that I showed you before. And just to make sure everything works, let's see if this passes the drop sniff test. Let's maybe make this one a little bit less bright so that it's more evident. And it does. Sorry for getting a little more technical and geeky on this one. Thank you for watching this far. I hope that this gave you some ideas on ways that you could define your own visual style, perhaps diving a little bit deeper into these tools, or it might speed up a workflow that you already had defined in nodes and you wish you could use without having to dive into the node editor every single time. Remember that you can try Vizloom right now by heading over to vizloom.com or finding the link I'll leave in the description below. And if you're not quite ready to jump into the action just yet, but you're curious about where this might be going, make sure to subscribe. The button is somewhere here to stay in the loop on what's coming. And with that, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.